this happened, I was living in a mountainous area of California and at the time was working in a restaurant. I was 24 and not in the best place financially, so I had been borrowing my uncle's car to drive to and from work. I usually worked from 5 to 11 p.m. and I knew everyone in the area pretty well. One of those nights, I had gotten done closing up the kitchen and decided to have a beer before going home. As I was drinking my beer, I saw the bartender talking to a fellow community member, trying to get him to go home. The man was too drunk for his own good, and there were some out-of-towners that weren't too fond of the locals' demeanor, and it seemed like it was getting intense between them. As a local though, I was used to it. I knew they were drunk, but perfectly harmless. After I finished my beer, I went out and got in my car. From my car, I could see inside the bar and spotted the drunk local completely smashed. I felt bad for not offering a ride home, but I was tired from work, so I just drove away. About a mile from the bar though, I had a change of heart and felt that I should turn around and offer him a ride home. I knew he didn't live that far and it wouldn't be too far out of my way to do so, so I turned around and headed back. When I arrived, I entered the bar and I was straightforward with the local. I told him that I would give him a ride home and then pick him up in the morning, and he could get his truck then after he sobered up. I was 24 at the time and a small-built female, but he was smaller than me and about a 35-year-old looking male. I knew this guy had hit on me in the past, but I always shrugged off his advances. I assumed he was just a 35-year-old weirdo who was lonely. Anyway, we finally hopped in the car and I took off driving towards his home, about 5 miles away on winding mountain roads. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at first. He seemed drunk and quiet, but not too long into the drive, he started saying thank you and how nice I was to help him out. I replied with the usual, of course, no problem, mentioning that I couldn't let him be out there knowing full well he wasn't able to drive. But then, something happened that really freaked me out. I made a turn onto the road he lived on. It was a long road, not many houses, and all of the driveways were long, about a mile or two, so you couldn't actually see any of the houses. Around then, the man got really quiet. I couldn't see him very well, but I noticed him look at me. I could see the reflection of his eyes from the dim lights on the radio. This was something I remember very vividly. His eyes gleaming kind of green from the lights on the radio knobs. This man was just staring at me. Without returning his gaze, I said, "What's up? Why are you looking at me like that?" His response sent up multiple red flags. He commented on how pretty I was and that he never got the chance like this to be alone with me. I shrugged it off, trying to play it cool, though I had already started regretting my decision to take him home. Then, all of a sudden, while I was driving, this man reached over to me and tried to put his hand on my shoulder and neck area. Immediately, I started yelling at him and telling him to stop. I slammed on the brakes in the middle of the road and I screamed at him to get out of my car now. I repeated it over and over. At this point, I had my hands off the wheel and I was physically trying to push him out of the car. I even leaned over and opened his passenger side door. Before this moment, I had never in my life realized my own strength, or rather, my own lack of strength. Despite my best efforts, this 30-something-year-old male was not budging. I noticed him laughing, and his words sent chills down my spine.
"You and I both know that no one is around."
I responded, "We just left the bar. At least 5 people know where I'm going. Please stop. Here's a flashlight. Walk on home, please. I'm done with you tonight." He was quiet for a minute before saying,
"I don't feel like walking much."
The way he said it terrified me. I started screaming an ear-piercing scream. The scream was so loud I even hurt my own ears, just hoping someone had their windows open somewhere off in the woods. But nothing happened. No one came. We continued struggling for what felt like minutes as he kept trying to come onto me. Horrifyingly, this entire time he was laughing. The man was drunk though, so that was probably my only advantage. He was sloppy, but still trying to attack me. I pushed against him like I had never pushed on anything in my life. I pushed so hard that I felt my arms just burning with pain. Eventually, he lost his equilibrium, and in that moment, I managed to push him out of the car. When he finally fell out of the car, I slammed on the gas immediately, not even bothering with the door. Keep in mind though, this road dead-ended after about 10 miles, but I kept driving down the road knowing full well I would need to stop to turn around eventually. This road was only about 1.5 lanes wide, so there were hardly any turnouts. Finally, I reached the dead end and I turned around as fast as possible in a stranger's dirt driveway. I was afraid of the car being still for even a second. After I turned around, I took off driving back towards where I last saw the man, knowing full well he would be up ahead any second now. But I never saw him. He was a local I'd known for years and saw frequently at that same restaurant. I don't know if he took off to another area from embarrassment or what, but I never saw him again. I was still paralyzed with fear on the drive back, but 30 minutes later, I arrived home, shaking, red, scratched, out of breath. Thankfully though, my boyfriend and our friend were at home playing Jenga, and I told them what happened immediately. Both of them knew who it was too, and they went to try to find him, but none of us ever saw the man again. Part of me is thankful, but part of me is concerned that this man is still out there, and he could do this again to another unsuspecting victim. All I know is I'll definitely be keeping a taser on me in the future. This story happened to a woman from Texas. It will be told from her point of view. It was summer, the day after 4th of July, and my husband and I were in the middle of a cross-country road trip. We were driving through Texas, and for any of you who've ever driven across the entire state, you know that it's very long and very barren. Sometimes we'd go hours without seeing anything of note at all. The towns we did pass through didn't consist of much more than an old gas station and a few little houses. As we drove, I started getting a headache, and my husband suggested that I take a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colors of a desert sunset. The slowing of the car woke me up later, and the first thing I noticed was how dark it was. I believe it was around 10 p.m. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a small shop. He told me he was going to grab us some food and asked if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while, I went into the shop to use the restroom. Both the men's and women's restrooms were down a little hall from the main area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realized how badly I needed to pee, so I shuffled into the restroom. As I made my way the short distance from the door to the nearest of the two stalls, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of the only other stall. She didn't quite look homeless, but she was definitely unkempt. She had wild gray hair that looked like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. I remember noting her foam flip-flops. She was wearing ragged clothing with several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Now keep in mind, this is Texas in July. It was over 100 degrees outside. The coat was just hanging on her shoulders crookedly, like she hadn't bothered to take more than a few seconds to put it on correctly. Also, she was carrying something in a tied-up plastic grocery bag. Trying to be polite, I gave her a quick smile as our eyes met, and she just stared at me in return. Then her face turned wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as if she was angry, but her eyes had a wild look. She looked at me as if she was hungry, and this was when I felt the first tinge of something wrong. I tried to brush it off. The lady walked over to the only sink, and I took my time shutting the stall door because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd, and I was trying to figure it out. She was standing with her body more angled towards me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched as if she was ready to act. Suddenly, I felt very uncomfortable. I regretted leaving my purse and cell phone in the car, but there was nothing I could do about it now. I closed and locked the stall door and took my time. I knew I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall, so I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam close. The door was pretty heavy and it slammed the same way when I had entered. I stayed for another moment and allowed the wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock. But then I paused, fingers only an inch from the lock. I stayed as silent as I could to try to confirm what I thought I'd just heard. Breathing. This woman had only pretended to leave. At this point, I was starting to get terrified. Why had she tried to trick me into thinking she left, only to stick around and be as quiet as possible? I knew something was very wrong, so I stayed in the stall even longer. This time it must have been at least 20 minutes, but I had no way of knowing for sure. I could tell from the direction her breathing was coming from that she had positioned herself in the far corner, right next to the door, but far enough that I couldn't see her feet. Again, I thought I heard her leave, but this time, I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the stall, quickly washed my hands, and rushed down to the hallway to the main part of the store. It was pitch black outside, and I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far, though. A large man was checking out at the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store, and quietly slipped out the door behind him. Sure enough, crouched right outside that front door was the woman. She seemed surprised as she stood and turned away, walking quickly around the side of the store. Not wanting to take any chances, I sprinted to the car where my husband was waiting for me. He asked me if I was okay since I had taken so much longer than usual, and I said I would tell him all about it once we were away from that store. In that moment, that's all I could think about, getting away from that woman. I don't know if she was on drugs or what, but I'm just thankful I wasn't hurt. A few nights ago, I received a call from a friend of mine asking if I could give him a ride to an event and then pick him up an hour or so later. I didn't have much to do that night, and he offered me $40, so I agreed. Around 8 p.m., my friend and I were in the car and on the way to his event. That night, it was pouring rain and there was more traffic than usual due to the event, so I had to pay extra attention to the road. At 8:30, we pulled up to the venue and my buddy got out as I drove on. Now, the place I took him to was about 30 minutes away from my house, so it made more sense to me to stay in the area rather than driving all the way home and all the way back. With this in mind, I turned on my music and started driving around looking for a place to park my car and chill. I was in a brand new luxury car which had a sweet sound system with Bluetooth that I could hook up to, but I didn't want to wreck trying to connect it, so I pulled off into a vacant gas station so I could get everything connected. And that was where everything went wrong. Not only had I entered a vacant lot at night, but I was unknowingly in a bad area and all by myself. Being unaware as I sometimes am, I didn't realize the dangerous situation I was putting myself in. So, oblivious to any danger, I was sitting there connecting the Bluetooth when for whatever reason I decided to look up. As I glanced up, I saw an old white BMW pull into the parking lot rather quickly and then stop in the middle of the lot directly in front of me. Strange. But now my guard was up, and I waited to see what they were doing. A couple moments passed, and then, all of a sudden, the dude in the passenger seat flung his door open and sprinted towards my car. Towards me. The look this man gave me was absolutely horrifying. I can only explain it as a look you would give someone that you 100% intend to harm, or worse. My heart dropped, and so did my foot, onto the gas pedal. I pulled out of the parking lot and into the far lane of the street. I looked back briefly and saw that the man, and now a female too, were sprinting towards my car, which I had brought to a stop at a nearby red light. Beyond caring about any traffic laws, I hit the gas again and peeled out of there. I kept going, weaving through back roads and running red lights until I finally made my way to the highway. Fortunately, my car was quick, so I didn't give him a chance to catch up to me. I'm pretty sure this group of people saw me sitting all alone in the gas station parking lot in a luxury car and saw me as an easy carjacking. I'm just beyond thankful that I noticed them before they were able to pull me out of my car and do God knows what to me. To all of you, if you find yourself driving late at night in an unfamiliar area, please stay alert of your surroundings. I am certain that it saved my life that night.